right, so our topic today is going to be daily spiritual practice. Before we get to the spiritual practice side of things, I want to start with the question of daily. What are some things that you do daily? Brush your teeth. That's actually the first one I was thinking of. Brush your teeth. Other things like that. Wake up, hopefully. Eat. Sleep, shower. Newspaper. Okay, that one kind of brought us out of the realm of complete necessity into the realm more of, excuse me. For some, the newspaper might be out of the realm of complete necessity. For others, it might be as essential as brushing the teeth. What else? Sleep. Go to the bathroom.
Check my calendar.
Check my calendar.
Check your email.
Check your email. What are the new essentials of our daily lives?
Get dressed.
Get dressed. Which means take off pajamas and put on daily clothes. Beyond the bodily essentials, are there other things you do every single day?
I say good morning to my husband.
Say good morning to your husband or whoever you might see in your house. Talk to your kids. Get in the car, leave the house. I'm sure there are other things we're not thinking of, but okay, so yeah.
Check the weather.
Check the weather. That's a good one. How do you decide that these are things you're going to do every single day?
It's rote.
It's rote.
After age 12, it's rote.
So many of these things aren't things we even think about. It's funny, after age 12, because brushing your teeth is a thing you probably don't think about doing every day. But those of us who check our email every day, that's probably something in the past 5 to 10 years that's become essential, but it's become an essential part of our daily lives. How about talking to your kids? How is that a decision? Or how does that come to happen every single day?
My mother always called our house at 5:30. We always knew.
In the morning?
No. We
I have my morning
in
already
the
done.
morning.
Okay.
And that was something my children got used to. You talk to your mother every day.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in a second marriage for 20-some years now, but initially my husband said, "Don't you tell your children to come to work? Why are they always calling you?" And I said, "You don't get it. This is a practice that they observed growing up,
Mhm.
and they have continued."
Great. How about checking your email? Why is that something you do every single day?
See what's going on in Israel.
Okay, check what's going on in other places in the world, in Israel.
It's the outside. You want to know what's happening with the people that you're in contact with.
So again, it's a keeping in touch with different people kind of thing. How about brushing our teeth? Why do we brush our teeth every single day? And often for many of us, it's going to be twice a day, and there's also going to be flossing involved. Okay, so hygiene.
And when your husband's a dentist.
Okay. So the idea with brushing our teeth is that we know, because we've been taught often by parents, also by commercials, by dentists, that we need to have our teeth clean. And that's something we kind of buy into. But the toothbrush is not the only way we can do that. There's many ways one could brush their teeth, but it's the way that we've been raised to clean our teeth. Okay, it feels better. Part of it's also not only that we know it's good for us, it's also part of our morning that we want to get that taste out of our mouth or get ready for bedtime. Part of it thinking about the toothbrush thing is that there could be other ways to keep our mouth clean, but we all kind of find comfort in doing the way that the experts tell us is the way to brush our teeth. I'm getting some kind of funny looks, but also some looks of recognition, so I'm going to keep that there. And that everyone around us is also brushing our teeth. And that's kind of part of the brushing our teeth thing. We don't usually stop to think about that, but it is actually something that we all have in common, and that we all agree this is the best way to do this kind of thing. So all of those daily things that we just mentioned have some sort of concrete thing that they achieve. Hygiene, getting us in touch with the world, checking the weather so that you know what to wear when you leave the house, eating, going to the bathroom, are all things that are just obvious we have to do them because we couldn't really go through our day in a comfortable way without them. Now I want to move to daily spiritual practice. Why have a daily spiritual practice? Why might someone do something spiritual every single day? What's the point?
Takes you out of the mundane and lifts you to a different level.
Great, so it gets you out of the mundane and lifts you, or has the potential to lift you to another level.
I think ultimately it makes you feel good. It starts your day with the feeling that, okay, I'm in a better place.
So it's not the feeling good of clean teeth. It's not the feeling good of clean clothes or eating. There's some kind of other kind of feeling good that can happen when engaging in that. So one of the main person we're going to use today in our exploration of daily spiritual practice is Abraham Joshua Heschel. Is he someone that you've studied together in this group a little bit? So he is one of the major theologians, but I think he wouldn't like that word. One of the major theologians of American Jewry. He was born in Poland and came over right before the war. He was actually brought, I believe, by Hebrew Union College and went directly to Cincinnati and lived there for a number of years. And then later on, he moved to New York City and he taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I went to seminary, and also where I still work. And the essay we're going to use today is from this book, Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity. It's not actually a book that he wrote, it's actually a collection of essays and lectures that he gave that his daughter, Susanna Heschel, who herself is a scholar in her own name, particularly feminist Judaism, compiled this book of essays that he wrote. And the essay we're going to focus on today, is called Toward an Understanding of Halakha. And it's actually a lecture that he gave to the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, being Reform rabbis, in 1953, trying to argue for here's why we should have a daily spiritual practice. So let's see what Heschel says about why have a daily spiritual practice. So we talked about hygiene being one of the main daily things that we do. He says its purpose is not essentially to serve hygiene, happiness, or the vitality of man. Its purpose is to add holiness to hygiene, grandeur to happiness, spirit to vitality. To add holiness to hygiene, grandeur to happiness, spirit to vitality. So one thing we're going to look at next week is there's a blessing to say after going to the bathroom, which I'm getting some looks of recognition. And that, I think, is adding holiness to hygiene, spirit to vitality. And then the next image is an image that's going to take us through today and next week. Spiritual meaning is not always limpid. Transparency is the quality of glass, while diamonds are distinguished by refractive power and the play of prismatic colors. So we're going to think about our hygienic and our kind of mundane daily practices like brushing our teeth are like glass. They're transparent. The reason you do them is clear. You can look at glass and see directly what's on the other side. Getting dressed in the morning, the purpose is transparent. To get out of the pajamas that you slept in and into a clean set of clothing that's the right temperature because you checked the weather for that day. The daily spiritual side of things is going to be like a diamond. While a diamond is beautiful to look at just glancing at it, the beauty of the diamond is also what one sees reflected in different lights. Sitting in a different room, sitting in a different space, the purpose of the diamond, the way of looking at the diamond, refracts in a way that glass just doesn't. Because often we're looking for the point of doing something. And the whole point that Heschel's going to show us is that spiritual practice, the point isn't transparent. So then the challenge is, how do we get ourselves to do it? If we're so used to doing things because they're productive, because they're practical. So before we get we'll start by looking at our handouts. Oh no, one more question. So we talked about why we do our daily practices. Why, if we're going to do a spiritual daily practice, why do a Jewish one? We're Jews. Unpack that though. So we're Jews, so we're also Americans. We're also 21st century citizens of the 21st century. We're also, insert any other thing we identify as here. Why do the Jewish ones?
It connects us with other Jews, and
Okay.
it re-establishes or reaffirms our special relationship with God.
Okay, so it establishes our relationship with other Jews, I would say both contemporarily, but also generations back. It has the potential to connect us also with God, because often these spiritual practices are ones that have been created or developed with reaching God as one of the goals. What else?
I think it's comfortable.
It's comfortable.
It's like putting on a comfortable bathrobe or a comfortable pair of shoes.
The words that are going to be present in the Jewish practices are going to be words that are familiar. The themes are going to feel comfortable, they're going to feel familiar. I think also because they've been vetted by generations. This goes back to my toothbrush example. We use the toothbrush because dentists say this one works. Yes, you can still get cavities even if you use a toothbrush, but this one works. And I think similarly, why not explore other traditions? Because our people have found that these practices work. Doesn't mean they let you reach God every single time you do them, but it means they work.
Well, I think it also depends on your age.
Okay, say more.
Because as we get older, life begins to throw things at us that we haven't expected. And I think we look at things differently. It may be when you're young and you're very kids and everything, you may need a tooth, but from personal experience, I would say that as we get older, it certainly is something because you begin to count the days.
And so why turn to the Jewish one in that?
Well, because that's what I am.
Wouldn't the other ones be so foreign to us? I mean, I've had a lot of Christian friends, and sometimes they suggest books to me, and one was on something about Jesus walking on earth, and I was so disconnected, and you want to get connected. That's what the idea of doing that, and that's our road, not someone else's road.
So it's our road, and you're not going to encounter something foreign in it. It's going to be the familiar that you're encountering.
The other thing for me is it grounds me. It sets me in my place and makes me ready for
So I had this experience this past weekend. I was at Asrui with the 7th graders from Beth Emet, which is my primary kind of role at Beth Emet. And during Shacharit on Shabbat morning, rather than doing a traditional Shacharit service, we did some yoga in place of Shacharit. And as we're talking about this, why do the Jewish thing, it was interesting for me because usually Shabbat morning, what am I doing? I'm saying the tefillot in the Siddur, I'm saying Shacharit. And for the kids, it was a mixture. We did Birkot HaShachar traditionally, well, a little bit of hand motions we don't usually do. We did Birkot HaShachar traditionally. We did a Torah service, and in the middle, we tried something else out. And there I felt the reason to go outside of the Jewish tradition was to get their bodies moving, which is one of the things that when you're in 7th grade is something you kind of need in the morning to be able to sit through the Torah service. So part of it's also, I'm definitely a fan of engaging the Jewish ones, but sometimes there are bits of wisdom that I think are valuable to pull in. So one more piece about daily, so we did daily, we talked about the daily piece, talked about the spiritual piece and why did the Jewish one. And the last one I want to speak about before we get to Heschel is practice. Daily spiritual practice. And there's a concept in Judaism that I'm going to introduce, which is called keva and kavanah. Are these two words that have kind of been brought here? So kavanah is the feeling you get when you're praying or engaging in something and your heart is really in it. It's one of those Friday night services when you walk away and you say, wow. It might be because you really connected to God, you really felt community in that setting, you really felt something. But keva is the regular practice part of it. The word in Hebrew, keva, it's kuf, bet, ayin. So when you put a mezuzah on a door, the bracha is likboa mezuzah, to affix a mezuzah. That kind of solidity, with the nail and the hammer on the door, that's what the word keva means. So it's the daily routine of doing the same thing over and over. And the kavanah one can achieve when having a keva practice is different. I think about when someone's trying to become a runner. When you're not, this is a personal experience. I tried to practice running, and I hated it. But occasionally, I wouldn't hate it. And that was a certain kind of kavanah, a certain kind of height I could achieve, which is different from someone who runs every single day. When they hit a runner's high, that kavanah is something different. And so we're going to look now at a passage that Heschel wrote. So he's from Poland, and he went to Berlin to study philosophy at a secular university. He had left a completely immersive Jewish community where everyone he knew observed the mitzvot, and just their way of looking at the world was, what mitzvah can I observe right now? What commandment? How the whole daily life was structured around traditional Judaism. And he went to Berlin, and he had this experience where he was studying philosophy. The questions of philosophy are, what is the meaning of the world? Big questions, but he found that his questions were not the questions they were asking. And the questions in the university were not, how do I engage with God? Not, how do I be holy? But what is good? And the philosophers couldn't assume that God existed, but that's where he was coming from. So this is a moment he's in that milieu, and he realizes it's time to perform a mitzvah. And the conflict that he goes through as he tries to figure out in this new context, how does he cling to his daily Jewish spiritual practice in a way that he'd never been challenged about before. So I'm going to pass it out, and then we're going to read this aloud together. I remember this is from an address that Heschel gave to the Conference of Reform Rabbis in 1953. It's also perhaps in response to an article written by Soloveitchik, who for many years was I'm actually not sure his title, but was the rabbi in Yeshiva University. And Soloveitchik had such a strong role in modern Orthodoxy that when modern Orthodox Jews say the Rav, everybody knows they're talking about Soloveitchik. So he had a huge impact on modern Orthodoxy. And in his book, Halachic Man, he talks about mitzvot are not, as I described them, like diamonds. He would actually say mitzvot are like glass. You do them because you are supposed to do them. And anyone trying to derive any kind of personal pleasure or meaning or something deeper from a mitzvah actually has the wrong motivation. That is not the point of mitzvot. Mitzvot are to fulfill God's will. And your only desire should be, what is God's will at this moment? How can I fulfill it? Check, look for the next opportunity. So when Heschel is writing this piece, he's responding to Soloveitchik saying, don't look for meaning, it's just about fulfilling God's will. But here when Heschel's doing it, he's speaking to the Reform rabbis, who I think maybe were having this feeling of why bother with all of these mitzvot when it's just fulfilling God's will? And Heschel's trying to say, no, no, no. Soloveitchik is wrong. We do the mitzvot because there's something deeper within them. All right, so let's see. I'm going to suggest that we just kind of go around. How do you usually read texts in this group? I guess I'll ask you what's your best practice for this? Great. So let's have someone read the first paragraph, and then we'll have someone kind of do the back and forth in Heschel's head, and we'll pause. Whoever volunteers to read, know that I will interrupt you frequently. Sound good?
In those months in Berlin, I went through moments of profound bitterness. I felt very much alone with my own problems and anxieties. I walked alone in the through the magnificent streets of Berlin. I admired the solidity of its architecture, the overwhelming drive and power of a dynamic civilization. There were concerts, theaters, and lectures by famous scholars about the latest theories and inventions. And I was pondering whether to go to the new Max Reinhardt play or to a lecture about the theory of relativity.
Sounds like an undergrad, right? Someone has just left their parents' home and they're amazed at the depth and the breadth of experience that is just one step away in front of them. And who they were before they got there is kind of this fuzzy thing in the back of their head with so much standing before them. And then Heschel has this little voice from who he was before he got to Berlin that speaks. All right, let me invite another reader. Thank you.
Suddenly I noticed the sun had gone down. Evening had arrived. From what hour is the Shema recited in the evening?
So Heschel sees the sun go down, and what happens when Soloveitchik sees the sun go down is he says it is time to daven Mariv. It is time to say the evening prayers, and he goes and does them. That's kind of how simple and straightforward Soloveitchik has the experience. Whereas for Heschel, he sees that the sun has gone down, and he quotes Talmud. So this line right here, from what hour is the Shema recited in the evening, is a direct line out of the Talmud. The very first line of the Talmud is from what hour in the morning is the Shema recited. And this is a little bit farther on, and he asks that question. So not only does he get ready to pray, but his mind kind of starts working in that language.
I had forgotten God. I had forgotten Sinai. I had forgotten that sunset is my business, that my task is to repair the world under God's dominion. So I began to utter the words, who with his word brings down the evening.
So that line, he started to say Mariv. So after we say Baruch Hu in the evening, the very next bracha is the one that says Ha'ma'ariv Aravim, God who brings down evenings, and this line translated, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim. So that's a familiar line. So, so he begins to daven, but then what happens?
We're going to make you read the German.
Does anyone have a comfort in German? They want to do the German part? You want to pick up reading from him? Thank you.
Ober allen Gefäll ist Ruh.
Wait, but first, and Goethe's famous poem rang in my ear. Continue.
Ober allen Gefäll ist Ruh. Oh, I'm sorry. Or all the hilltops is quiet now.
So we just had a conversation about why Jewish, because that's our language. That's where we come from. That's who we are. But Heschel's having this moment of when the sun goes down, Ma'ariv pops into his head, but so does this poem about the exact same moment of the day. Because he's now developing multiple languages to how to react to sunset. And we have grown up in this context where we're both Jewish and American, or other places that we come from. Whereas Heschel, as an adult, for the first time, is having to balance two different lenses of looking through the world. Continue, please.
No, that was pagan thinking. To the pagan eye, the mystery of life is ruh, death, oblivion. To us Jews, meaning beyond the mystery, we would say, or all the hilltops is the word of God. Über allen Gefäll Gottes Wort. The meaning of life is to do his will. Who with his word brings down the evening.
Asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim.
And his love is manifested in his teaching as Torah, precepts, laws. Over allen Gefäll is God's love for man. You have loved your people, the house of Israel, with eternal love. Torah and mitzvot, laws and statutes you have taught us.
Avat olam veit Yisrael et amcha ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadata. That's the line he responds to Goethe's poem with the second blessing of Ma'ariv, with God's love. All right, just there's two more little paragraphs and then we'll pause.
How much guidance, how many ultimate insights are found in the Siddur. How grateful I am to God that there is a duty to worship, a law to remind my distraught mind that it is time to think of God, time to disregard my ego for at least a moment. It is such happiness to belong to an order of the divine will.
Thank you. So what's happening? What's happening to Heschel so far?
What I found interesting is that he refers to the Siddur. I would assume, like many of his days, many of us in this room to this day, know the prayers, and the Siddur is there. But the fact that he references text, I find very, very intriguing.
Text meaning the text of the Siddur?
Yes.
Say more.
In other words, instead of saying how many ultimate insights are found in God's teachings or the Torah, he refers to the Siddur, and I question whether it's because he's speaking to a group of Reform rabbis in the 50s.
That he would say Siddur as opposed to
Torah.
Interesting. Okay. So he's not saying, oh, Judaism is so wise. He's saying the Siddur is so wise.
Yeah.
Interesting. So let's go back to the text and see, just kind of rehash. What happened? What's Heschel experiencing? What's he going through in this piece?
Well, he's in a strange place, and he's used to, doing the things that they do there, and now all of a sudden his Jewish thoughts say, well, there's other things that I should be doing at this time.
Thank you. Is he comforted or unsettled by the Jewish thoughts popping into his head at this moment?
Unsettled. I would say unsettled. I mean, it comes as I never thought of this before. And now this circumstances make me aware of it.
Or perhaps is he unsettled that he's doing this pagan thinking, and then the Jewish thoughts make him feel more comfortable. I don't know. He's torn. He's very. I can see this happening to other people who go away to college, kids who go away to college. He's being introduced to so many things that he's forgetting some of that, and now it's really bad.
I sense that this is really his experience, that he's not making this up.
It feels true. It feels honest and personal.
It does. And it comes from someone so deep inside him. And of course, I always admire people who can express the depths of their feelings and their emotions. And in the expression, I think that what he's doing is reconstructing his life and his purpose and his sense of what it is to be a Jew in a world.
Because he has what it is to be a Jew in the context where everyone around him is Jewish and thinking Jewish, and everyone when the sun goes down says, let's say Ma'ariv. But now he's constructing what it is to be a Jew with daily Jewish actions in a broader context. Because he's thought of the Jewish being separate from what he calls here the pagan, which I think is both an antiquated use of the term, that we wouldn't use it that way, but also I think also shows his fear. The question also is, so why did he choose to come to Berlin to do a PhD at a secular university? And that's also common for when kids go away to college, knowing they want to leave home, but when they get there, not actually realizing what that's going to mean, what that's actually going to feel like when they get there. I think it's also, it reminds me of a sermon I once gave in a homiletics class, where I put Rashi, who's the greatest Jewish commentator on the Torah and also on the Talmud, I put him in conversation with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was one of the first feminists in America. I guess suffragettes probably a better word than feminist. And for me, those are two kind of pillars of where I come from. Being an American woman, and also being a Jew who loves to read text. But a classmate of mine who doesn't have the same joy in American history of feminism was a little uncomfortable that I would put this modern American voice in conversation with this traditional voice. And part of it is trying to figure out what's the right way to allow his Goethe poetry affect his Judaism, and figuring out how, and I think he's trying to figure out how to let those two speak to each other. How about that last paragraph that we just read? I'm grateful to God that there is a duty to worship. When we talked about brushing our teeth and the mundane daily actions, we talked about a necessity. For many, daily Jewish spiritual practice has the same kind of necessity. And so far in this piece, Heschel is grateful for that. He feels comfort in that. He likes that he's required to disregard his ego. And for me, that is one of the most important parts of daily Jewish spiritual practice, is forgetting what you want to do, forgetting your own desires, and letting go to something else. But let's finish this passage and see it's actually not just that simple. This isn't just a coming home spiritually for Heschel, it's also a great challenge. So can I have another reader, please? And you can just take us to the end of this section.
I am not always in the mood to pray. I do not always have the vision and the strength to say a word in the presence of God. But when I am weak, it is the law that gives me strength. When my vision is dim, it is duty that gives me insight. Indeed, there is something which is far greater than my desire to pray, namely, God's desire that I pray. There is something which is far greater than my will to believe, namely, God's will that I believe. How insignificant is my praying in the midst of a cosmic process. Unless it is the will of God that I pray, how ludicrous is it to pray?
All right, let's pause there. So what's going through Heschel's mind in this piece? Why is he praying in this moment? Because God wants him to. And how does that feel to him?
He wants to feel that God wants him.
Is this what you expected to come after the first whole section there?
Is trying to find his place. And I think that he's grateful that his belief in God and an understanding of what God expects of him is serving him well as he's going through this. I mean, to go from Chicago to Urbana was not a big deal. But to go from a shtetl environment into this hugely cosmopolitan city where it's got to be so incredibly frightening, he's able to find comfort and strength because he feels this connection to God.
The line that says, how insignificant is my praying in the midst of the cosmic process?
Mm-hmm.
If he was just praying for himself, it would be this small. But then he feels like he's praying for the will of God, which is so much bigger. So then he's connected to something bigger, something beyond his grasp.
Which goes back, I think, to the diamond glass metaphor. That it's not just that the sun goes down and therefore I pray, it's that the sun goes down and I believe that there's some greater order of things to which I'm contributing that is causing me to do this. In New York this is very common, I haven't seen it yet here, where you see Chabad, representative shlichim from Chabad, standing on street corners asking you if you're a man, if you put on tefillin today. Or if it's Sukkot, asking have you shaken lulav etrog today. Or on Fridays you might see them giving out Shabbat candles. The week before Pesach they'll be giving out Shmora matzah. Why is Chabad so interested in getting Jews to do mitzvot? They believe,
To get them involved in Judaism, to bring them back into the fold.
Right, so broadly, it's to get more Jews doing Jewish things, which is kind of the broad understanding of it. But more specifically, Chabad have a belief that every mitzvah that is done is slowly setting the world, in kind of a cosmic sense, but the world is kind of off kilter. Since the exiles, the world just kind of just messed up, kind of off kilter. And every time a Jew does a mitzvah, it sets the world a little bit straighter, and a little bit closer to the Messiah coming. Imagine if you held that belief. Imagine if you believed that every time you engaged in a mitzvah, you davened, you lit candles, you did chesed. We also often think of daily spiritual practice only as being the internal, the between God and human ones of praying, those kinds of things, but also chesed, visiting the sick, taking care of the poor, doing clever kadisha, all of those things are also mitzvot in the same depth. And imagine if you believed that every time I did one, the Messiah, if you believed in the Messiah, which I do, you believe the Messiah was this much closer to coming. And every time you helped another Jew engage in it, you believe that. Now, Heschel doesn't believe, his theology doesn't go kind of in that practical direction. His is more of a, you're connecting to something greater in the cosmos. You're fulfilling God's will. And this, I think, is one of the hardest disconnects in our contemporary context, in a non-Orthodox context, thinking about why do daily spiritual practice? Because Heschel said the purpose is not clear, but he still sees there's a purpose. And that's the question I want to think about for a few moments now is, so many things get in the way of our engaging spiritually and Jewishly daily, but Heschel has this motivation. What could be our motivation? Why might someone who doesn't believe in this concrete way, that it's God's will, how could we overcome that and still be moved to engage daily?
Tikkun olam.
Say more.
Oh. It opens a whole different world. It's just go out and help your fellow man. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. Practice our philosophies and not just ritual or.
So the interpersonal ones are the ones that are kind of more accessible to feel a drive to do. Well, I guess I'm also starting without actually asking, do any of you that you feel comfortable sharing have daily spiritual or daily Jewish practices? What are some of them?
The Shema in the morning and the Shema before I go to sleep at night. And I actually do my early Rabbi around that time, just partly to myself, because my husband would never fall this morning.
So saying Shema in the morning and evening?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Others?
I don't exactly say the Shema, but each morning when I wake up, I do say thank you to God for allowing me to wake up. And I do a lot of visiting the sick.
Mm-hmm.
Chair of that committee, so that's part of what I do.
That's also a location of obligation, is if you're communally engaged in a mitzvah. Because it's easy if you have an individual thing you do at home, the only person holding you accountable to that is yourself. But if you're chair of a committee that's in charge of a daily act of chesed, you might not feel responsible to God in the same way that Heschel does, but there's the communal responsibility.
But you could give that deed to someone on your committee. And
Right.
Go do
Yeah,
it.
right. You do.
Unless you do it yourself.
Are there some other daily spiritual practices?
When I go into my 4-year-old's room in the morning, I say good morning and we sing Modani.
So seeing Modani, and having a kid also, in some ways, can help one, because it helps you see that moment, and there's an external reason to do it, of helping another person learn this is how we greet the day.
He sings it.
Is there some more?
Attending religious services regularly, coming in here,
Right.
coming and sitting and meditating and communing with other, with the congregants in a community environment.
All right, so let's finish up. I'll finish the reading of this piece. On that evening, in the streets of Berlin, I was not in a mood to pray. My heart was heavy, my soul was sad. It was difficult for the lofty words of prayer to break through the dark clouds of my inner life. But how would I dare not to daven? How would I dare to miss a Mariv? And here he's quoting the first line of the Talmud. From what hour, ma'ematai, do we recite the Shema? And then he gives a midrash. So that's the line. From what hour do we say the Shema? And he reads a midrash on that line. Say rather, out of ema, out of fear, do we read the Shema? So the first line of the Talmud says an ematai, from what time, but it's commonly read midrashically to say mit, from, ema, from fear, but fear also reverence, awe. Do I say the Shema? Not just from what time, but what inside me stirs me to say the Shema. Part of what I find so moving about this piece is he's so committed to his practice that even when he's loath to do it, he does it. And that's the feeling. How many of you have not wanted to come to synagogue, but known that exactly what you needed that day was come to synagogue?
Yeah.
And synagogue can't be meaningful if you've never come. It can't be a place of comfort, of solace, unless it's a place you're comfortable coming, so that on the days when it's just what you need, it's that. And that's part of the daily spiritual practice piece for me, is having the routine, so on a day when I need it, it's always there for me. So what do you think of Heschel's guilt? Or what makes him pray? The guilt that he feels, and the real accountability to God. Either is that something that you identify with, or how would it feel to have that?
I have it, but not in a Jewish sense.
Okay.
In other words, I was told I have to exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and so it has now become a daily small commitment. And it is my time of saying, this is my responsibility. God gave me my body, and therefore this is what I have to do.
Is that you said God gave me my body? Is that how you generally think of it, or how this conversation is making you
As
say
I
it?
sort of think of it that way. Whatever I think of as God, I am here. I'm responsible to someone, something, some whatever. And so when I don't do it, it's more than just, oh my golly, my body's going to fall apart. This is my responsibility. I have to show, it's my way of showing appreciation or duty or whatever. It has nothing to do with Judaism, but I understand, I think, a little bit of what might be going through his mind.
The sense of obligation that makes you do something, even if it's not a sense of letting anyone down or missing something in a concrete way. There's something what's the word? Something that's not present right in front of you, but still gives you the feeling of the obligation. Are there other areas in our life when we have this kind of need to do something that's not because of a concrete consequence?
I need to read every day.
That was exactly the example I was thinking of.
I absolutely have to read. I cannot imagine a day without reading. I can't imagine walking out, carrying something around to read. Fortunately, now I have the iPhone, the iPads are always carrying something around. But seriously, that to me is just such an... When I was at university, I would study until 10 o'clock and then read. Because it was just something I just to do.
And imagine taking reading out of our lives. And what would be lost if we didn't read? Keep email in there and the kind of keeping in touch kind of stuff, but take out newspapers, magazines, books, and articles. How would our lives be different without that?
Well, reading to me is getting myself very, very quiet, because I think during the day we're bombarded by a lot of stimuli. Even when we're on the internet, if we're reading, suddenly an advertisement pops up.
Right.
And
And the next articles are at the bottom.
Right. And then so you're bombarded visually and auditorily by a lot of stimuli, and that you have no control of. But the reading, if you possibly can control the phone not ringing or something, but it makes me very quiet, and sometimes you need to be in that quiet space to have that centeredness, to center yourself.
So one thing that reading does is it quiets us down, centers us, and kind of calms us from the stimuli around us. What else would be missing or different if we didn't have reading in our lives?
There'd be little stimulation of one's imagination,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is one of the key components of reading for pleasure.
So with fiction, or even often nonfiction, the lives in our imagination are largely, especially when we're beyond the age of playing with children, or not beyond the age, but we're not playing with children who are imagining much more frequently. The lives of our imaginations are largely sparked and alive because of the reading that we do. And so taking reading out of our lives, it's not concrete things we would be taking away. It's pieces of our lives that deepen what it means to be alive. Imagination, quieting ourselves down. And daily Jewish spiritual practice is a similar kind of piece, because if one is praying in the morning using a siddur, it's a very similar act to reading. It's calming one's mind down. And in fact, reading the same thing over and over, because often I read before I go to bed at night, and often I have to keep reading another chapter, another half chapter, because my mind is so busy with what's going on in it. Imagine reading a book daily, where it's so good you want to read it daily, and you know exactly what's going to happen on the next page. And that's part of what prayer is for me, is it's calming, but even more so the reading, because you know exactly what is coming on the next page. And one of Heschel's lines that helps me when I'm trying to get the energy as Heschel. So Heschel, when he needs the energy to pray, he just remembers that it's what God wants him to do. For me, I actually often think of Heschel when I'm having trouble praying, and he says, where is it? Of all things we do, prayer is the least expedient, the least worldly, the least practical. Because I'm trying to think about, here are the 10 things I have to do before I leave the house in the morning. I have to brush my teeth. I have to pack the baby's bottle. I have to. And it's easy to let prayer get knocked off the list because it's not going to fulfill a goal. And then I remember that Heschel tells me, this act, in its purpose, is not expedient. It is not useful. And I remember it's not useful. Rather than saying, well, then it's useless, I say, and therefore, that's why I must do it. I was recently spending time with a number of Protestant clergy, and we were talking about, actually the next article that I'm going to pass around is actually by Rabbi Greenberg, who taught this group a few weeks ago, or a few months ago. And it's actually a book club of young mother women clergy that I'm in with Danya and a number of Protestant women. And the thing that week actually had been the article we're going to read in a few minutes. And it's about how many times a day there is an answer to what the Jew is supposed to do. Right? The sun goes down, we say Ma'ariv. And we're talking with these Protestants about there's a lot of guilt if we don't fulfill all of those things. But then the Protestants were saying, but I kind of wish I had words for these moments. I wish that I had words for, there's the thank you when you get up in the morning, and there's the comfort of saying Moda Ani, and the balance of finding the right words and feeling the guilt for not saying them. So we're going to read Danya's article. It's specifically, so it came out right before Rosh Hashanah, and it's specifically about balancing a daily Jewish spiritual life with being a parent of young children. So for some of us that might feel very pressing and very relevant, but what I want to invite you to do as you read the article is think about what are the things in your life that press on you. What are the obligations you have that can make you feel constricted? Like you don't have enough time to engage in maybe some other things you want to be doing. What are the things that trump what else you want to be doing in a day? And so let the parenting piece not kind of throw you and say, well, this doesn't speak to me, but find something to kind of put in the place of the parenting. I'll write it on the board. It's called Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Life. book title on the board. All right, so this is also, you can see it's from the New York Times Motherload blog, which is a great blog. So can I invite someone please to start us off and just read a few paragraphs?
When I was a rabbinical student and then a new rabbi, I wrote and spoke often about the importance of regular spiritual practice. Fixed discipline, I said, would hold you in your attempts to connect with the sacred.
Exactly what we spoke about a few minutes ago, about having some kind of practice, some kind of routine of going to synagogue means that when you really need synagogue, it's there as a rock.
Then I became a mother and my prayer life tanked. The liturgy just wasn't the same solace it used to be, and I couldn't figure out how to force myself back into the old practice. I felt like a failure, a fraud with a dirty secret. Rabbi who couldn't figure out how to pray.
And part of this also, you spoke before about how Heschel really feels like he's pouring his heart out. And I think similarly here, Danya is really letting you know, this is really what's going on inside of me. I'm someone who knows that daily spiritual practice is a powerful, powerful thing. But how do I maintain that spiritual life when something is getting in the way? Something that feels like a concrete obligation, children, as opposed to something that is a metaphysical obligation, a spiritual obligation.
Yet I should have expected that my spirituality would be different, given how many other things had changed. It wasn't just me either. I started to realize this wasn't uncommon. My mother always said that she never believed in God until she had children, for example. And it turned out that some of my rabbi mom friends were in a similar boat, confessing in whispers that holding a sleeping child felt much more like worship than reading Psalms most days.
What do you think Heschel would say to that? You think he would agree?
Yeah.
Say more. Who thinks he would agree and why? I mean, yeah.
The connection with the child is metaphysical. It goes beyond the Siddur.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a connection to why we're here.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the connection with the child, as you're saying, is metaphysical. It does speak to the broader question of why we're here and what our duties are in our time on this earth. But I think Heschel might also say, but I'm still going to have to say Shachari. Even if I snuggle with my child, I still have to say Shachari.
More purpose to be, more things that you got for what you have in it.
And so this moment that he has could even deepen his experience of saying Shacharit that day, because he has more joy and more gratitude and more reason to speak to God. But I think Heschel would say, but you still need to say the words. You still need to put on the talis, put on the tefillin, and stand before God and say those words. But this is also a spiritual moment. But I think he wouldn't let you off the hook for saying Shacharit, because he's having this moment of watching the sunset and engaging with God in that moment. But his words that are not tefillot, that are not the structured tefillot, aren't enough for him. Now let's have a new reader, please.
Religious literature does not always reflect these experiences, at least in my tradition. Jewish law suggests that you shouldn't hold the child during prayer, lest you disturb your concentration, that you shouldn't kiss your children so that our crying does not disturb your hearing. Another source reminds fathers not to hold a diaper child before afternoon prayers, lest he become soiled and miss the start of services. Well.
Speak. React.
Wow.
Is that still, do you think, is that still practiced in Orthodox communities?
Well, Orthodox communities, there's a broad range. One Orthodox minyan that I used to pray at in Jerusalem, we described it as a daycare with a minion problem. Both sides of the Mechitza had so many kids you couldn't possibly focus. So that's one end of the things. But there are many synagogues where, especially Sephardic synagogues in the States and in Israel, where the women's section is kind of a little closet with shutters that open up, and the men's section is the center, and you're really not going to have many kids that are there. So part of it is kind of the structure of obligation to pray, kind of in traditional Orthodox communities. The men are praying and studying, and the women are with the children. So part of it is kind of saying what the household breakdown might already be. But those who've had multiple children in their house, or been in houses with multiple children, it's kind of impossible to have multiple adults in the house, multiple unhappy kids, and have some adult not engaging with what's going on.
Isn't that the reason why women weren't obligated to pray at a certain time because she had other obligations? Doesn't this to me is, if you're at least trying to pray and your child needs attention, to me you should be giving your child attention. I understand you're taking away for God for that moment, but I think you're excused. I think you should be excused.
Right, so these texts I think are specifically, as many halachic texts are, specifically talking to men. The understanding that being that the women in these contexts are not obligated to time-bound mitzvot. They're not obligated to mitzvot that have to be done by a certain time of day or time of year. So they're obligated to keep kosher, but not obligated to say shacharit, because during the hours when one would say shacharit, they might be fully engaged. One kind of more contemporary understanding of this kind of balance of men being obligated and women not, by Rabbi Ethan Tucker of the Hadar Institute in New York, his idea is that it makes sense in a family that has two parents and children that one parent be obligated and one parent not be. So he breaks it down and says rather than men being obligated and women not, it makes sense that in a household, one adult fulfill these obligations and one adult take care of the household stuff, and then it can switch back and forth. When his wife was clerking for Supreme Court Justice Breyer, and he was with the kids, he didn't get to daven that much because he was with the kids more and she was working. So that's an example of kind of turning these around. But as much as we can re-understand pieces of the tradition for our context, the way prayer has developed in a context where these texts made sense. There's an idea that the way prayer is in Judaism, it can't have distraction. It can't have other obligations going on in our lives because it involves such focus. I think about Heschel's experience, this distraction is kind of a metaphysical distraction. And here the distraction is trying to figure out, saying that prayer has to happen when you're not being distracted. And now he's going to give us a solution for how to deal with that. All right, can I have another reader, please? Or a repeat reader?
There is not very implicit assumption that someone else somewhere is in charge of the sticky, cuddly, needy, emotional little humans who evidently impede a person's ability to live a life of spiritual service. Spirituality and young children are placed in opposing, incompatible spheres. Women in particular are relegated along with the children away from wherever it is that they are keeping a connection with the transcendent. People actively engaged in parenting are not wanted there. The idea that...
Wait, let's pause for a second. What else could parenting be in this context? So I want to broaden it from the experience of parenting.
You can have a businessman feeling obligated to do his business. It would be the same thing.
Exactly, so we can have someone whose job, work responsibilities, be they business, be a lawyer, be a doctor, someone who has call at all sorts of different hours that are going to, and those those are real responsibilities. I also think about other kind of caregiving that we might be engaging in, not just with small children, but other people in our lives who need more care, older people who need more care, parents, relatives. Having someone else's daily functioning being in your hands beyond just young children is another kind of obligation that can really feel like it gets in the way when you read these texts and say, if you're praying, you need to be on your own, quiet, or at synagogue with no distractions around you. And it makes prayer seem nearly impossible. Because all of us, no matter what kind of our stage of life is, we're going to have other things that are pulling on us. So let's see what Dawn is going to do, or she's going to continue.
Okay. The idea that loving and caring for children could be a core, crucial, even transformative aspect of a religious life is totally absent from this tradition. Some churches and synagogues make efforts to be family-friendly, offering toys in the back corner of the worship space, babysitting, or separate children's services in a different room. I both applaud these efforts and make pretty ample use of them, but they do perpetuate this notion that grown-up prayer, the real spiritual life, is something that happens only when the kinder are otherwise occupied, not with them, or dare I suggest it, through them.
We often think that it's very generous for synagogues to have separate programming for kids, but what she's going to try and tell us is actually, let's bring all the messiness of our lives, not just the kids, but all the messiness of our lives into the spiritual experience, as opposed to saying, when I'm visiting my grandmother in her continuing care community, I'm going to daven first and then see grandma, and that's going to be separate. Spiritual life, actually it's my grandma's birthday today. I just remember she's 88 years old today. Thinking that visiting her is going to be separate from my spiritual practice. Being a doctor on call on Shabbat means I can't care about Shabbat. In fact, it can inform the way that we engage in all of these things. All right, let's. So I want to make sure the childhood thing is I think very powerful, but I also want to kind of make sure people are able to have in their minds space for whatever other kind of things are pulling on you. All right, let's continue.
The philosopher Sarah Rudick talks about maternal thinking, the ways in which caring for small children gives rise to a unique kind of intellectual and emotional flexibility and responsiveness. She suggests that doing this work changes how you engage the world in useful and important ways. I wonder what would happen if the experiences, issues, and questions that come out of parenting were taken seriously in our thinking about prayer, theology, and religious practice. Now, as a parent, I find plenty of space for prayer. Sometimes my practice is traditional, singing with my children, saying words of liturgy to them and to God, as well as prayers in the conventional sense.
And this is the next paragraph is the piece that I want to think about how we can find this. And kids are uniquely good at helping us see the wonder of the world, but what she's encouraging us to do in this next piece is going to be having moments of prayer and awe, not just when we've said, now it is time to pray. And it's being open and letting daily spiritual practice actually be awe of the world, something that we take with us wherever we go, as opposed to something that we schedule every morning. Please continue.
But just as often my prayer, offered up with intentionality to the divine, involves deep contemplation of my one-year-old's ear. Radical amazement, if you will, or hallelujah.
Radical amazement is one of Heschel's terms. It's his word for being able to look at the world and be in awe.
Sometimes it can be found in just being present with my children, snuggles or smiles, or games or fielding questions from my older son. Sometimes I manifest it in a tiny cry, help, barely perceptible even to me when my kids' needs are too big and overwhelming, or even just when they are being normally rambunctious despite the fact that mommy didn't sleep so well last night. There's enough room in our spiritual expressions not only for all the love we feel for our families, but also for the hectic, distracted chaos that so often defines parenting small children. We are willing to expand our understanding of what religious expression is and can be.
So how would Heschel respond to this?
I don't think he could relate to this
Okay.
because of the time that he was born and the time that separation of men and women in prayer and the separation that he wouldn't even think of putting a child into a service
Mhm.
because that just wasn't done. It just wasn't part of prayer and being Jewish and being spiritual. I don't think he would be against it. He wouldn't think of it. He just wouldn't think of it. And I think the more women, get into, Judaic practice, being
Mhm.
rabbis or some kind of clerics, that's how it expanded to this,
Great. Other responses?
This doesn't sound particularly Jewish.
Why not?
We don't know what words she is saying or thinking, but I think there are a lot of us who might find moments of awe in the midst of things, but it doesn't satisfy the saying the words in the Siddur, which he talked about in the beginning.
So I'm trying to find this thing I'm struggling with also is how to figure out because engaging with God and the awesomeness of the world we live in, I think, is a Jewish thing. But we have scripts for it, which is how we've been traditionally taught is the way the Jew engages with the awesomeness of the world. But then Danya, and I think I imagine many of us have this experience in the world of seeing awe, or she also gives the example of crying out for help. And traditionally you might turn to the book of Psalms and read Psalms that petition God's help, but I think we all have those prayers in our heart of petitioning God for help in those moments. And is trying to find the Jewish piece. Another famous line of Heschel's is he was very involved in the civil rights movement in America, including marching in Selma. And of that march, he said, "I felt like my feet were praying." And so for him, I bet he davened shacharit that morning. But he also felt like that way of engaging with the world was an act of prayer also. So I think he might say you have to say shacharit every day, but there's other moments of prayer in your day. And Danya is giving us permission. She's saying, we may not be able to do the liturgies, read the scripts every single day, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be moments in our daily lives that are engaged in that kind of way. I think that's also one of the kind of part of the spirit of Reform Judaism is being in conversation with the tradition and finding ways that it works in your life to live it.
I'm in the midst of a fascinating essay whose title is Kugel and Kashrut. And it just resonates with what we're talking about today, because the thrust of this article is about how the move to do away with minhag as being unimportant and mitzvot being very important. And what this article, essay is going to do ultimately is say how one informs the other. And that we have to keep both to some extent, which I feel goes very much along with Reform Judaism today. Finding that mix, and not just in other, of course the title indicates, it's important to make kugel, it's important to keep kashrut, which is more important, and that kind of a thing. Those decisions that we make on a daily basis aren't taken lightly, even though they may feel like we're taking them lightly. We assume that we're doing the right thing. But I think the more informed we are and the more we look into ourselves, not anyway like Heschel could, we can pull out that title of spiritual audacity and find the meaning in the mundane.
I'm going to bring up something very practical that happens at our temple all the time, because we have children in there all the time. And some people, if a child gets a little yelp out, they get all upset.
During services?
Yes.
Okay.
And then
Who
some.
gets all upset?
people around them, and they
Okay.
go, oh, wait, no, why can't they keep their children quiet? Question. Or the other ones that, or sometimes when the mothers go too far on engaging their children, and the children get off on, like one time when they were doing Ring Around the Rosie in the back of the temple, or the back of the synagogue, or the sanctuary, but it wasn't related to the services that were there.
Mhm.
Or the other thing is what I say, I'm glad they brought their children,
Mhm.
So I think that debate goes on all the time, that push and pull. Sometimes people do come and they need that quietness.
Mhm.
And usually it's the people who have, raised their children, and I guess they want to come there and go ahead and play. So I think that, there's a disparity, and it's probably not just in our temple, it's probably all over, so you don't know what to do about it, so, because I think that is a push-pull. You want to engage your children, you want them to be involved, but, you don't want them to disturb other people as well. And sometimes little babies will cry a long time, but sometimes the parents, this is just my judgmental thing, the parents don't do enough to keep them quiet and tell them this is a spiritual place.
Or the question is, what is spiritual then?
Right.
And part of it's the question of bringing our own messy lives into synagogue. Kids are just the most obvious example because they actually shout out. But thinking about all the emotions that we have at the end of the week on Fridays when we come to synagogue on Friday night. And the complicated stuff that we bring of just an exhausting week, wanting to shed that when we come to services. For most of us, it's an internal process that we don't share with those around us. We don't turn to the person next to us and say, let me unload my week on you. But when people bring kids, they're a manifestation of the noisiness and the messiness that's happening. And it's figuring out how, as a community, can we have a spiritual experience together when not all of us can sit still? And the question is it better to have a special service for kids where they can express the noisiness of their spirituality and let others have the quiet moment? And I don't know what to do there.
We have
And I've heard some of this conversation amongst Christians. And my feeling from the few conversations that I had, or women relating their experience, was that they were very severe with their children. And their children were expected. Now, in some of the age ranges, I'm not so sure if I can't recall, but there seemed to be an expectation amongst these women that their children needed to be respectful of the situation. Frankly, I don't see it around here. I may be, wrong about that, but I rarely see it. And I'm not saying the severity of the other women were right. I'm not saying that. I don't know how your fellow ministers feel.
I have a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old who was just bat mitzvah this weekend. And I feel like I can't come to Friday night services. I feel like I can't bring my warrior to a service. Now, if I can come to the younger service, it's not really appropriate for the 13-year-old, and it's not necessarily going to be what's right for me. But I also don't feel like I can leave them at home and come, because what I should be doing, what Friday night is about for me, is being with my family, and if I need to do, so we can light candles and have, be together when I can get my 13-year-old at home. But I feel at this point in my life that Friday night services is not an option for me. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, God, how do I make it, I would love to make it work. And as you're talking, I'm trying to figure it out. But I really don't feel like it's an option for me at this time.
And I don't mean for this to be a conversation about how the synagogue does services. I'm just...
No, it's not here.
Can I make a suggestion?
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
So, first of all, we have the matzo ball soup service,
Right,
Once
for
a month.
the 4-year-old.
which is marvelous.
Yes.
And children should come. Second of all, our services for children
technically are too long. 7:30 to 9, 9:30, that's too much. However, my philosophy is bring your Jewish children into the synagogue and let them listen to the sounds of Judaism as much as you can. Bring them here into this building as much as you can. Caruso is wonderful, the Sunday school, the religious school is wonderful. They need to be here to experience, as I call them, because I'm a music-oriented person, the sounds of Judaism, the music, the spirituality. Sit in the back, sit as long as you can.
You're right.
Leave when you can. We have Tat Shabbat for the 4-year-old for one Saturday a morning. I think we should have more family services. In the summertime, it's wonderful. We have 6:30 services.
Right.
But I fully believe you should bring children into the synagogue to let them listen to the sounds of Judaism. And as I said, and just play it by ear. If they have to bring a book to sit and occupy themselves, if they have to bring a stuffed toy to sit and cuddle with, that's all fine and well and good. Sit in the back, let them get up and move around if it's not disturbing to the people. I'm very emphatic because I have grandchildren, I have twin grandchildren, that I am exposing them to the sounds of Judaism through CDs of all the folk singers, the outstanding folk singers that we have here. And they're picking up Hebrew through listening. They're picking up the nigunim, the melodies, and the spirituality, and the traditions. Hit and miss whenever you can get them in here to observe. And let them listen at home to Jewish music. Debbie Friedman, Craig Tobman, Josh Nelson, Donnie Massang. These are all relevant to our young Jewish family. We need to do that to bring children back into the synagogue. Debbie Friedman was the pioneer of all of this.
And I think we've kind of tapped into another conversation here, which is communal spiritual life, which is another issue kind of related to the personal spiritual life. Because the daily spiritual practice kind of assumes we're talking about the individual's engagement, and then how to bring that into the community when we have different needs when we come here that are going to be tapped in differently. Did you have a...
I was going to say essentially what was just said, and the option of bringing your children, and if they get rowdy or uncomfortable walking out for a while, you can hear what's going on. And also the once-a-month service, which I refer to in Hebrew as the Rowdy Shabbat, and that's where we have a band, a tequila band, and nobody's quiet. And so if one can't come every Friday night with lunch children, those options I find wonderful for our grandchildren, and I would have were they in place when my children were little. So.
I think also part of it is, I said I did yoga this past weekend with my 7th graders, and maybe yoga is not the right thing for the synagogue on Friday night, but we often realize that kids need to move around during services, kids need variety, often forgetting that as adults, we also could benefit from part of that. And part of that also is thinking about what ways are we being creative, ways that Danya is thinking, I can't pray every day the way I used to because of my kids, so I'm going to think about what can my new spiritual life be. And a big life change like children often inspires people to realize I need to refigure this I need to refigure a lot out. But I think what I want to take from her to this group is, in whatever stage of my life I'm in right now, have I done a spiritual life check-in since my life started looking the way it does now, whatever that might mean, whatever your situation is, have I paused and have I looked and said, am I engaging with the world the way I want to be now? Is my Jewish life serving me now? So much of our conversation about Jewish community is about, are the 20s and 30s joining the synagogues? Not thinking, are the 50s, 60s, 70s getting the meaningful engagement that they want? Are they getting the resources that they want in their Jewish lives? And I think part of it is on us to think, what does my Jewish life look like? And is it what I want it to look like? What does my daily engagement with the world look like? And do I want to add a little bit? Do I want to tweak a little bit to help enhance that piece of it? So my plan when we were going to do 3 sessions together was to do today kind of an opening thinking about the push and pull of daily spiritual practice, the Heschel and the Ruttenberg. And I was going to do a session where we looked at kind of tallis and tefillin and traditions surrounding that. And the third session was going to be the tradition. There's a teaching that says every Jew must say 100 blessings a day. Which again is the balance of Judaism having a script for every moment in our lives. But I think there's a lot of wisdom behind the obligation to say 100 blessings, but I think maybe taking away the script might be the way for many of us to do it. So I'm thinking that what we'll do next time is we'll not do the tallis and tefillin section, but focus on this idea of 100 blessings a day. I'm getting some nods, I think that's what we'll do. What it might look like, and why we should say 100 blessings a day, and what that can do for our spiritual lives. So we're going to end a few minutes early, I hope that's okay. And this is great, and thank you very much. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to talk about it. Thank you.